September 20th, 1863. Dawn. Chickamauga, Georgia. Confederate Colonel Hiram Berdan aimed his modified rifle at a Union artillery officer 800 yards distant, a range where conventional military doctrine said accurate rifle fire was impossible. The officer stood beside his cannon, binoculars raised, directing fire against Confederate positions. He felt safe. 800 yards was beyond effective rifle range, according to every tactical manual written. Smoothbore muskets were accurate to perhaps 100 yards. Standard-issue rifles might hit a man at 300 if the shooter was skilled and lucky. 800 yards was artillery distance, not infantry distance. Berdan's rifle, however, wasn't standard issue. The telescopic sight mounted on top, a crude tube containing ground glass lenses salvaged from a surveying instrument, had been attached 2 years earlier when the rifle's iron sights were damaged during a skirmish and no replacements were available. The modification had been an improvised field repair, not tactical innovation. A gunsmith in Vermont had mounted the telescope because Berdan couldn't aim without sights and ordered sights would take weeks to arrive. The gunsmith didn't know he was creating the world's first practical sniper rifle. He was just fixing broken equipment using available materials. What Confederate and Union commanders couldn't know, what would take 2 more years of war to fully comprehend, was that the marriage of precision rifling and optical magnification would fundamentally change infantry combat. The artillery officer at Chickamauga fell dead 800 yards from Confederate lines, killed by a weapon system that military theorists had declared impossible, a rifle that could deliver aimed fire at ranges previously reserved for artillery. Within months, both armies would be scrambling to replicate Berdan's modification. Within decades, every army would be equipping specialized marksmen with scoped rifles. Within a century, sniper rifles would kill more enemy officers and high-value targets than any other weapon system. This is the story of how an accident, a broken sight mount during a minor skirmish in 1861, created precision long-range shooting and transformed warfare from massed formations to individual marksmanship. Not through tactical genius or engineering innovation, but through desperate field repair that revealed a capability nobody had been looking for. The American Civil War began in April 1861, with both sides equipped primarily with smoothbore muskets, weapons unchanged in fundamental design since the Napoleonic Wars. The standard infantry weapon, whether Union Springfield or Confederate imported Enfield, fired a spherical lead ball that left the barrel tumbling unpredictably. Accuracy beyond 100 yards was more luck than skill. Military tactics reflected this limitation. Infantry fought in massed formations, relying on volume of fire rather than precision. Officers led from the front because being visible to their own troops was more important than avoiding enemy fire that couldn't reliably hit individuals beyond point-blank range. Rifled muskets had existed since the 1850s, but weren't widely adopted until the Civil War forced modernization. The mini ball, a conical bullet with a hollow base that expanded to grip rifled barrel grooves, made rifled weapons practical for military use. Suddenly, infantry rifles could hit targets at 300 to 400 yards with reasonable accuracy. But military doctrine hadn't caught up to technology. Officers still led from the front. Formations remained dense. Artillery officers directed fire while standing exposed next to their guns. The tactics of smoothbore warfare persisted into the era of rifled weapons, with catastrophic results. Hiram Berdan understood rifles better than most military officers. Born in 1824 in Phelps, New York, Berdan had been a mechanical engineer and champion competitive shooter before the war. He held several patents for firearms improvements and was nationally known for winning shooting competitions using rifles of his own design. When war began, Berdan proposed organizing a regiment of sharpshooters, elite marksmen who would function as skirmishers and scouts rather than line infantry. The concept was controversial. Professional officers distrusted specialized units that operated independently, but Berdan had political connections, and in November 1861, the first United States sharpshooters was authorized. Berdan's sharpshooters were equipped with Sharps rifles, single-shot breech-loading weapons firing .52 caliber bullets. The Sharps was more accurate and faster loading than standard muzzle-loading rifles, but its sights were conventional iron, limiting effective range to perhaps 400 yards for skilled shooters. Berdan, accustomed to competitive shooting where targets were engaged at known distances with carefully adjusted sights, found combat shooting frustrating. Battlefield distances were difficult to estimate. Iron sights required the shooter to align front and rear elements while keeping the target in focus, difficult under combat stress. Berdan wanted better optical systems, but military procurement didn't include telescopic sights. The accident occurred during a skirmish near Yorktown, Virginia, in April 1862. Berdan's rifle was struck by Confederate fire, breaking the rear sight mount. The rifle was otherwise functional, but couldn't be aimed. Standing orders required damaged weapons to be turned in for repair or replacement, but Berdan was 200 miles from the nearest armory and facing immediate combat operations. He sent the rifle to a local gunsmith with instructions to mount any available sighting system that would allow aimed fire. The gunsmith, whose name is lost to history, found a surveying telescope in his shop, a civilian instrument used for land measurement, with approximately 4x magnification and a simple crosshair reticle. He fabricated mounting brackets from scrap metal and attached the scope directly to the Sharps rifle's barrel. The installation was crude. The scope was mounted offset because the rifle's hammer would have struck a center-mounted optic. The eye relief was wrong, forcing Berdan to crane his neck awkwardly to see through the scope. But it worked. For the first time, Berdan could see targets clearly at ranges where iron sights showed only indistinct shapes. The first use of the scoped rifle was unplanned. During a reconnaissance patrol near Confederate positions at Yorktown in May 1862, Berdan observed a Confederate officer directing troops from what the officer clearly believed was a safe distance, approximately 600 yards from Union lines. At that range, the officer was a barely visible figure through iron sights. Through the telescope, he was clearly identifiable. Berdan aimed, accounting for bullet drop at distance, and fired. The Confederate officer fell. Berdan's patrol reported the kill as standard sharpshooter action, but Berdan understood he had achieved something unprecedented, a first-shot kill at a range where aimed individual fire wasn't supposed to be possible. Over the following months, Berdan refined the concept. He sourced better telescopes through civilian suppliers, experimented with mounting systems that improved eye relief and reduced offset, and developed techniques for estimating range and compensating for bullet drop at extended distances. He trained other members of his sharpshooter regiment in telescopic sight use, creating what would later be recognized as the first organized sniper unit. But institutional resistance was significant. Regular infantry officers viewed telescopic sights as unsporting, as violating the implicit understanding that combat was conducted at ranges where both sides could reasonably engage each other. Killing men at 600 to 800 yards, where they couldn't effectively return fire, seemed like assassination rather than legitimate warfare. The effectiveness of telescopic-sighted rifles became undeniable during the Peninsula Campaign of 1862. Berdan's sharpshooters positioned at extended range systematically eliminated Confederate artillery officers, disrupting fire coordination and reducing artillery effectiveness. Confederate forces began keeping officers back from frontline positions, reducing their ability to direct operations effectively. Union artillery officers, observing the success, requested similar capabilities. By late 1862, both Union and Confederate armies were improvising telescope mounts for selected rifles, creating ad hoc sniper weapons without formally acknowledging the doctrinal revolution they represented. The Confederate response was characteristically resourceful and desperate. The South lacked the industrial capacity to manufacture precision optics or mount them reliably on rifles. But individual gunsmiths working with imported telescopes and locally fabricated mounts created functional scoped rifles for selected marksmen. Confederate snipers working from prepared positions around besieged cities like Vicksburg and Petersburg achieved remarkable results. One Confederate marksman firing from a church steeple in Petersburg during the siege of 1864 reportedly killed 37 Union soldiers at ranges exceeding 500 yards before being killed by counter-sniper fire. The arms race between Union and Confederate sharpshooters drove tactical evolution. Snipers required concealment. They couldn't operate effectively from open ground or traditional infantry positions. This led to the development of camouflage techniques, the use of natural terrain features for concealment, and the construction of fortified hides that provided both protection and stable firing positions. Counter-sniper tactics evolved. Artillery would target suspected sniper positions, infantry would conduct flanking movements to eliminate sharpshooters, and enemy snipers would duel each other for position control. The individual marksmanship competition that Berdan had participated in before the war became a deadly military reality. The psychological impact of snipers exceeded their actual casualty counts. Union soldiers advancing across open ground near Confederate positions developed what period accounts called sharpshooter fear, the paralyzing awareness that an invisible enemy might be targeting them from beyond effective rifle range. Officers stopped wearing insignia that identified rank, knowing that snipers targeted leadership first. Artillery officers directed fire from behind protective barriers rather than standing exposed beside their guns. The entire pace of warfare slowed as both sides became reluctant to expose troops to potential sniper fire. By 1863, commercial telescope manufacturers were advertising rifle scopes specifically marketed for military use. The most common were simple tube systems with fixed magnification between 3x and 5x, mounted in rings that attached to the rifle barrel or receiver. Quality varied dramatically. Civilian telescopes weren't designed to withstand recoil forces, and early mounts frequently failed under sustained use. But even crude scopes provided a capability that iron sights couldn't match. A competent marksman with a scoped rifle could engage individual targets at 600+ yards, double the effective range of conventional infantry weapons. The technical challenges were substantial. 19th-century optics weren't sophisticated, lenses were hand-ground, often with significant aberrations. Mounting systems were improvised, creating inconsistencies and zero retention. Scopes had no adjustment mechanisms. Shooters learned to hold over or under the target to compensate for range rather than adjusting the scope itself. Eye relief was inconsistent, forcing shooters into awkward positions. Recoil frequently damaged scopes or shifted mounting brackets, requiring constant readjustment. Yet despite these limitations, scoped rifles extended effective engagement ranges by hundreds of yards. The Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863 saw extensive use of sharpshooters on both sides. Confederate sharpshooters positioned in buildings and rocky outcrops around Devil's Den engaged Union forces at extreme range throughout the three-day battle. Union sharpshooters countered from Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge. The casualty counts attributed to sharpshooter fire are disputed. Some estimates suggest up to 500 men killed by long-range precision fire during the battle. What's certain is that both armies dedicated significant resources to deploying sharpshooters with the best available weapons, including whatever telescopes could be acquired. One documented incident from Gettysburg illustrates the revolution in combat that scoped rifles represented. On July 2, 1863, a Confederate sharpshooter positioned in a Devil's Den rock formation, approximately 500 yards from Union positions on Little Round Top, systematically engaged Union artillery officers. Multiple officers were killed or wounded before Union countersnipers located and eliminated the Confederate marksmen. The engagement lasted approximately 30 minutes. At that range, the sniper was invisible to naked eye observation and beyond effective iron sight rifle range. Only telescopic observation and return fire made counter-sniper operations possible. The industrial North possessed advantages in producing sniper weapons that the South couldn't match. Northern manufacturers could import high-quality European optical glass, have precision machining capability to produce consistent mounting hardware, and could scale production to equip hundreds of sharpshooters with standardized equipment. The South relied on imported telescopes, running the Union blockade, civilian hunting rifles adapted for military use, and individual gunsmiths fabricating custom mounts. Confederate sniper weapons were often superior in individual quality. Craftsmen produced meticulously fitted custom rifles, but couldn't be replicated in quantity. Union sniper weapons were adequate rather than excellent, but available in numbers that the Confederacy couldn't match. By 1864, both armies had developed formal sniper doctrine. Sharpshooters operated in pairs, one shooter, one spotter. Hides were constructed in advance, positioned to cover avenues of approach and high-value targets. Engagement ranges were predetermined and marked with reference points. Communication systems allowed snipers to call for artillery or infantry support if threatened. Counter-sniper operations were conducted systematically, using observation to locate enemy positions, followed by artillery strikes or infantry assaults. The ad hoc experimentation of 1861 to 1862 had evolved into the systematic application of precision long-range fire. The Siege of Petersburg from June 1864 to April 1865 represented the apex of Civil War sniper operations. Both sides occupied fortified positions separated by several hundred yards of no man's land. Any movement in exposed areas drew sniper fire. Union and Confederate sharpshooters engaged in months-long positional warfare, with both sides losing experienced marksmen to counter-sniper operations. The static nature of siege warfare favored snipers. Positions could be carefully prepared, ranges precisely measured, and fields of fire optimized. Casualty records from Petersburg show that a significant percentage of combat deaths resulted from sniper fire rather than artillery or massed rifle volleys. The technology continued evolving throughout the war. Later scopes featured better optical quality, more robust mounting systems, and occasionally primitive adjustment mechanisms. Some Union sharpshooters were equipped with target rifles, heavy-barreled, precision-built weapons designed for competitive shooting, fitted with high-quality telescopes. These weapons represented the pinnacle of Civil War sniper technology. Single-shot breech loaders with 32-inch barrels weighing 15+ pounds, chambered in specialized target calibers and capable of consistent accuracy beyond 1,000 yards in skilled hands. They were too specialized for general infantry use, but devastatingly effective in sharpshooter roles. The Confederate response to Union technological superiority was an adaptation born of desperation. Confederate gunsmiths developed techniques for restoring and repurposing captured Union rifles, for fabricating mounting systems from minimal materials, and for maintaining scopes under field conditions with limited supplies. Confederate sharpshooters became exceptionally skilled at fieldcraft and camouflage, compensating for equipment limitations through superior positioning and concealment. The David versus Goliath dynamic created some of the war's most effective snipers, men who achieved remarkable kill counts using improvised equipment and personal skill. When the war ended in April 1865, both armies demobilized rapidly. The specialized sharpshooter units were disbanded. The scoped rifles were collected, stored in arsenals, and largely forgotten. The institutional military returned to conventional tactics and equipment. Professional officers, many of whom had never fully accepted the legitimacy of sharpshooter operations, were happy to return to traditional methods that they understood and controlled. The sniper concept, born from accident and necessity, disappeared from American military practice for decades. But the precedent had been established. European military observers who witnessed Civil War combat returned home with reports of American sharpshooters engaging targets at extraordinary ranges using telescopic sights. The Prussian military, always interested in technical advantages, began experimenting with scoped rifles in the 1860s. British forces encountered Afghan marksmen using crude telescopic sights and recognized the need for equivalent capability. By the 1880s, most European armies had small cadres of trained sharpshooters equipped with scoped rifles, though institutional resistance to specialized marksmen remained strong. World War I demonstrated the full potential of sniper warfare that Berdan's accident had foreshadowed. Trench warfare created perfect conditions for snipers: static positions, predictable enemy locations, measured ranges, and prepared hides. Both sides deployed thousands of trained snipers equipped with purpose-built rifles and sophisticated scopes. German snipers in particular achieved devastating effectiveness, systematically eliminating Allied officers and breaking unit cohesion through psychological warfare. The British, French, and eventually American armies responded with their own sniper programs, creating training schools and doctrines that finally institutionalized what had been improvised 50 years earlier during the Civil War. The technological evolution from Berdan's improvised surveying scope to World War I sniper rifles was dramatic. Military optics featured precision ground lenses, sealed tubes to protect against moisture and debris, adjustment turrets for windage and elevation, and mounting systems that maintained zero through hundreds of rounds. Rifles were purpose-built for sniping: heavy barrels for accuracy, specialized stocks for stable shooting positions, chambers and bores manufactured to match tolerances. Ammunition was match-grade, with carefully selected powder charges and precisely weighed bullets. The crude field modifications of 1861 had evolved into precision weapon systems. World War II saw further refinement. Soviet snipers, particularly during the siege of Stalingrad, achieved legendary status. German snipers continued to be highly effective. American snipers in the Pacific developed techniques for jungle warfare that required different skills than those of European theater operations. Scoped rifles had become standard across all combatants, with dedicated sniper schools producing thousands of trained marksmen. The weapon system that began as accidental field repair had become essential to modern warfare. The Vietnam War demonstrated that snipers remained effective even in counterinsurgency operations against guerrilla forces. The legendary USMC sniper Carlos Hathcock achieved 93 confirmed kills, including the famous 2,500-yard shot that set records for long-range precision fire. Modern conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan have continued to validate the sniper concept. Precision long-range fire delivers disproportionate tactical and psychological impact relative to resource investment. At the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, sits one of Berdan's original scoped Sharps rifles, the crude surveying telescope mounted offset on the barrel, the improvised brackets showing signs of repeated adjustment and repair. Museum visitors examine it with curiosity, often missing its significance. The rifle looks primitive compared to modern precision weapons, but it represents the birth of a capability that changed warfare fundamentally: the ability to deliver aimed fire at ranges where the enemy couldn't effectively respond. The death ray that Tesla promised never worked. The exotic physics that consumed billions in research proved impractical. But the broken rifle sight, repaired by an anonymous gunsmith in Vermont using a surveying telescope because proper sights weren't available, created precision long-range shooting and transformed infantry combat permanently. Not through sophisticated technology, but through recognizing that optical magnification combined with rifled barrel accuracy could extend lethal engagement ranges far beyond what military doctrine considered possible. Hiram Burden received minimal recognition for pioneering military sniping. His sharpshooters were disbanded after the war. His contributions were overshadowed by more dramatic battles and famous generals. When Burden died in 1893, his obituaries focused on his pre-war mechanical engineering work, not his military innovations. The scoped rifle he accidentally created through improvised field repair was footnoted if mentioned at all. But every sniper who has operated since 1861, every marksman who has engaged targets at extended range using optical sights, every precision kill that disrupted enemy operations, every psychological victory achieved through invisible long-range fire traces conceptual lineage to that broken sight mount in Virginia and the surveying telescope that replaced it. The technology has advanced incomparably. The doctrine has been systematized. The training has been institutionalized, but the fundamental concept remains unchanged from what Burden discovered accidentally, that optical magnification combined with precision rifles allows individual marksmen to dominate battlefields at ranges where conventional infantry is helpless. Modern sniper rifles bear little resemblance to Burden's sharps. They feature sophisticated optics with variable magnification up to 25x, laser rangefinders that eliminate guesswork about distance, ballistic calculators that account for wind, temperature, and altitude, and rifles capable of sub-minute of angle accuracy at 1,000 yards. The most advanced systems cost more than $25,000 per complete package. Yet the mission remains identical to what Burden accomplished in 1862, precisely killing high-value targets at maximum range using optical sights to extend human vision beyond iron sight limitations. The psychological impact of snipers that Confederate and Union soldiers experienced, the fear of invisible death from beyond effective range, remains central to sniper doctrine. Modern infantry facing sniper fire exhibits the same behavioral changes that Civil War accounts describe: reluctance to expose themselves, reduced movement, psychological stress from knowing they're being observed without knowing from where. The terror weapon that emerged accidentally from a broken sight mount in Virginia in 1861 remains terrifying 163 years later. The technical accident that created the sniper rifle, broken sights repaired with wrong equipment that happened to work better than the original, illustrates how warfare evolves. Nobody set out to invent precision long-range shooting. Military procurement hadn't identified a need for scoped rifles. Burden wasn't conducting deliberate experiments to extend engagement range. A gunsmith simply fixed broken equipment using available materials. The improvisation worked so well that it created a new category of weapon. This pattern repeats throughout military history. Tank warfare emerged from desperate attempts to cross barbed wire. Aerial bombardment came from improvised balloon bombs. Radar developed from failed death ray research. The most revolutionary military technologies often emerge not from systematic research, but from accident, improvisation, and desperate attempts to solve immediate tactical problems using whatever materials are available. Burden's scoped rifle is the prototype for this pattern, the field repair that changed warfare because nobody realized what they were creating until it was already deployed and effective. September 20th, 1863, Chickamauga. The Confederate artillery officer falls dead 800 yards from Hiram Burden's position. Nobody watching understood they were witnessing the first true sniper kill. One man killing another at a range where the victim had no chance to respond or even know he was targeted. The technique would be refined over the next 160 years, but the fundamental reality was established that morning. Optical magnification combined with precision rifles gave individual marksmen the capability that transformed infantry combat. The broken sight mount that started everything was discarded decades ago. The surveying telescope that replaced it is lost to history. The gunsmith who fabricated the mounting brackets never knew his improvised repair would influence warfare for centuries. Hiram Burden died believing his military service had been moderately successful but not historically significant. None of them understood that the accident they were party to, the wrong scope mounted on the wrong rifle for the wrong reasons, had created precision long-range shooting and changed warfare permanently. The thunder of modern sniper rifles, the crack of supersonic bullets at extreme range, the silence of invisible death delivered from beyond retaliation distance, all trace ancestry to that broken sight mount in Virginia in 1862 and the desperate field repair that followed. Burden's rifle wasn't sophisticated. The scope was crude. The mount was improvised. The concept was accidental. But it worked well enough to matter. And because it worked, every soldier since has faced the possibility of invisible death from beyond the range where they can fight back, delivered by a weapon that began as a field repair nobody thought was important until people started dying in unprecedented ways. The accident created the revolution, and warfare was never simple again.